Like other TVs in its price class, the one behind me does some things well and some things not so well, which kind of raises this philosophical question. What should we be expecting from a 65-inch TV that costs between $650 and $800? The answer to that question changes year after year, so we just have to do the best that we can. Frankly, I'm thankful that you can get such great quality at a low price. But again, the TV behind me takes that and makes it even more complicated. Hey everybody, Caleb Dennison for Digital Trends, and today we're reviewing the Vizio M Series Quantum. And I should be able to just stop right there, except for there are two, possibly three versions of this TV out there right now. There's a model number with an 8 in it, there's a model number with a 7 in it. We knew about those, and then I was just researching, and it looks like Walmart has a model with a 6 in the model number, and it's down at like $500. What's that all about? Well, all I can do is speak to the M8 and the M7. The M8 has 90 zones of local dimming and higher peak brightness. Then the M7, which has like 20 zones of local dimming and lower peak brightness. And cost difference between the two is not a lot. So I'm going to say for most folks, you want to be looking at the M8 regardless. You just have to do diligence and make sure you're getting the right model. So how does this guy perform? Let's take a look. Now, just to be clear, we're dealing with the M8 version. This is the best version of the M Series Quantum available right now. It goes for about $650 for the 65-inch version. And I want to point out before we get to test patterns and real-world viewing that for the purposes of this video, we're shooting with the TV in calibrated dark mode for HDR 10, and we back down the backlight to about 37. But for the purposes of my evaluation, I just kept it at calibrated or calibrated dark and left the backlight setting where it goes. It's a little bit different for Dolby Vision. Here in Dolby Vision, because the picture tends to be a little bit darker, especially with Ozark, which I'm using here, we're sticking with calibrated mode for the most part. Calibrated dark darkens things considerably, not great for shooting in this environment. And then what I found with the different presets on Dolby Vision, the biggest difference tends to be the color temperature. So I would absolutely recommend that you stick with calibrated or calibrated dark if you're pulling this TV right out of the box. And one other thing to note is that if you go into the more picture mode, there's a game low latency mode that you can just switch on without necessarily having to go to the dedicated game mode. So here's our usual test pattern run, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because everything maps out really well in SDR. One thing I wanted to point at is one, no dirty screen effect on this particular unit. It's actually pretty good. Tracking really well with the tone mapping there. Everything's as to be expected. I wanted to point out here something that we see in this gradient test, a lot of little bars here. This looks really good in SDR, and I'm hoping that holds up in HDR as well. So again, with SDR, everything is looking pretty great right out of the box. Motion is even really good here. Now we're in HDR 10. You've noticed the boxes have gotten brighter. Not a ton of halo here. It's actually really respectable for this price class. So I'm impressed with that so far. Seems to be resolving everything pretty well. Particularly here, I notice, again, no dirty screen effect. Nothing serious anyway. Tracking well in HDR, not clipping too much over here or on the low end. So the tone mapping is looking solid. Resolves this very well, although you can't see it. And here we are, HDR gradient, and it's again looking really solid. This is far better than what we saw with the new TCL 6 series. So I think we're going to be looking at that again when we do our versus video. Across the board, magenta and red looking a little on the hot side there, but nothing that I am too worried about. And again, motion looks pretty smooth there, and I'm not seeing a ton of backlight movement here either, although I did notice something different in real life viewing. I'll get to that in a second. So overall, from a test pattern perspective, this TV seems to be doing a pretty good job. Let's start with black level, because obviously that's, you know, the basis of contrast. And the Vizio M Series Quantum, at least the M8, looking really solid in the black levels area. The local dimming is working effectively here, thanks to those 90 zones, no doubt. So I'm getting really, really nice delineation between the bright stuff and the dark stuff with not a ton of halo around it. Again, for the price, this is really respectable. And I like what the color is doing here. It is not oversaturated, it's well saturated. So that's a great start for Vizio. Now, inky blacks are all well and good, but not so great if they're crushing the blacks and removing shadow detail. And this the cows. It's hilarious, but this is actually a great shot for making that evaluation. We'll use another one later for Dolby Vision, but take a look at this black cow. This, in other TVs I've tested recently, is just a big black mass. You can't see any detail in the coat, but here we definitely see details in the coat. Meanwhile, it's punching fairly well in the brighter highlights. The clouds definitely have some depth to them. They're not just a big white wash. Now, I've been using this portion of the Spears & Munsell test disc for a couple of different things. One is for HDR highlights. There's a lot going on with the feathers there, but also because this is really hard to resolve without any ringing noise. It almost looks like a moire pattern. And while we are seeing just a tiny little bit of it, this TV is performing far better than much more expensive brands that I've reviewed recently. So again, a really respectable job happening here from the Vizio M Series Quantum, again, the M8 version. I do notice that it's not super poppy in the HDR highlights. For instance, in this scene, I've seen much better from the likes of the Samsung Q90R and even the 8 Series TCL that we recently reviewed. But on the whole, I feel like the balance is better. We're getting dark blacks, no loss of shadow detail, and then a respectable amount of HDR punch. So I've just pulled up Ozark, and I can only show freeze frames on this for the most part due to copyright kind of thing, but I'm starting to use this more and more as a stress test because this is an extremely dark production. We're in Dolby Vision calibrated mode, not calibrated dark. And on some recently reviewed TVs, this is just a black mass. There's absolutely no texture here. The buttons barely even pop through, but we're seeing a good amount of detail happening in this really dark fixture. Now for me, this has become an ultimate stress test for shadow detail. On the TCL 6 series, the new R625, I saw nothing in the shirt at all. It was just a black mass, and then the badges were kind of coming out of it. I could almost see the buttons on the TCL, but on this particular version, again, you can't see this on the camera, but I can see some texture to the shirt where before it was completely obliterated. I'll also note that no, this area right here is not as punchy as I've seen before, but on the whole, the image is much better balanced. And again, this is a really terrible dark scene. I don't think this is a great example of Dolby Vision, but this is the kind of content that is out there, and I want to see how the TV resolves it. So far, the Vizio M Series Quantum is doing a great job. Back to the Spears & Munsell, this is again HDR 10, calibrated dark mode. I'm looking for motion artifacts, and I'm definitely seeing a little blurring around the edges of the turbines. I'm also seeing some vertical banding here. So less of a dirty screen effect and more of vertical banding. I did use a few panning shots like this one to gauge the amount of judder that it exhibited, and you know what? It's not too bad. So if I'm judging the Vizio M Series Quantum, and again, that's the M8, purely on picture quality, I gotta say this is a pretty fantastic TV. The blacks are very impressive. The tone mapping is really good. Color, very accurate right out of the box. I suppose you could calibrate it, but who calibrates a $650 TV? I don't know, maybe you do. At any rate, it does a lot of things really well. I did see a little bit of sluggishness in the backlight system, so if it goes from a very dark scene to a very bright scene, you can visibly see it brighten for a second. It moves pretty quickly though. I wouldn't characterize it as super distracting. However, if I pull back and look at the broader picture here, like how punchy are those HDR highlights? Are you really getting your money's worth? I'd say yes. You've got to spend a significant amount more to get a higher peak brightness, enough to make the HDR highlights that much better. Then I got to address just general usability, right? You want to use the TV and enjoy it. And I gotta say this, sorry Vizio, I know you work hard on it, but SmartCast is just not my jam. Sure, you get Chromecast built in and AirPlay too, but it's a little slow to get the latest apps. It's definitely sluggish to use, and overall, I just don't prefer it. So that's a little bit of a knock as well. So if we take it all into context and we rank the TV, I'm gonna put it at a 4. It's a solid 4. The picture quality is really good for the price. I wish it was a more enjoyable TV to use, but if picture quality is your main concern, I think this one is doing very well, better than others in its price class in terms of balancing it all out. It's not the punchiest TV, but again, you got to spend a whole lot more to get at that. So definitely a great deal already, and with the holidays coming right up, and we're recording this right before Black Friday, price is probably going to come down even more. Definitely going into 2020, you expect to see more deals on this TV, which makes it an even more valuable budget proposition. So overall, I gotta say, this is a solid offering from Vizio. Definitely give it a look. See if it feels like the right TV for you. Thanks as always for watching, everyone. Don't worry, the TCL 6 Series versus Vizio M Series Quantum is definitely coming, so you don't even have to ask for it. But in the comments, let me know, do you really care about the smart TV system and how it operates, or am I focusing on that a little too much? Leave a comment, tell me what you think, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, visit digitaltrends.com for the latest tech news and reviews.